I call this meeting of Norwood City Council to order. Please rise for the prayer and pledge of allegiance. Our Father, who art in heaven, as a body we congregate in this council chamber, we pray for thy divine guidance, that we may do all things well, and according to thy holy will. Amen. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mrs. Williams, please call the roll.
Mr. Bonsall?
Here.
Mr. Gabbard?
Here.
Mr. Geraci?
Here.
Mr. Kelch?
Here.
Mr. DiNardo?
Here.
Mr. Thompson?
Here.
Mr. Braden?
Here.
All members present. We do not have any changes to the agenda, so we'll move on to item F, minutes of previous meeting. Mr. DiNardo.
Make a motion that we file the minutes, please.
Motion by Mr. DiNardo. May I have a second? Mr. Thompson?
Second.
Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonsall?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye. Motion passes. Moving on to item H, request to address council. The first request they have this evening is Mr. Ian Davis, mural component of Eagle Scout Service Project. Mr. Davis, please come forward.
Thank you very much.
Actually, we already got them.
Yeah, we've already got these.
Yeah, they gave them to us.
I want
Somebody
to.
gave us a copy, so you set.
Yep, yeah. Here, I'll keep that there.
Sir, do you have one?
I don't think so. Thank you very much.
I've got one.
Yep.
All right, good evening. My name is Ian Davis. I'm a 17-year-old lifelong resident here in Norwood and Eagle Scout candidate with Norwood Troop 9. And with me tonight is local muralist and Cincinnati resident Emma Olszewski. For over the past 18 months, I've been planning and executing my Eagle Scout service project at the Norwood Community and Senior Center to help revitalize the space and prepare it for more programs and groups to hopefully begin filling in the rooms once COVID begins to subside. I've come to present one of 4 of my project's components for City Council's review this evening, a youth-focused mural to be painted on the pair of exterior double doors at the community center facing Carter Avenue. I have provided a small packet to all of you that includes details and specifications about the project, images of the drafted design, as well as some of Ms. Olszewski's prior work for your review. As stated earlier, the design in question is a youth-focused, brightly colored mural that features 2 children enjoying ice cream under the hot summer sun. The design has a couple of different allusions, such as the allusion to our city's moniker, Gem of the Highlands, which is seen in the logo in replacement to the sun, the reference to the first car to come off the Norwood GM line, the 1976 Chevy Camaro, as well as a couple of others, such as the stained glass style seen in the hills and the clouds, as a reference to the many historic stained glass windows in buildings and churches and homes throughout Norwood. This mural will be painted using high-quality latex primers and paints with a clear gloss to help further extend the lifespan to reduce the amount of times that we have to come back to restore the piece and help it resist fading in natural wear. I would actually like to invite Ms. Olszewski up to center stage to talk for a couple minutes about her involvement in the project, if you will.
Hello and good evening. My name is Emma Olszewski. I am a 17-year-old senior at Ursuline Academy. My family recently moved to Norwood in the most recent couple of months to be closer to my mom's nonprofit local Montessori school that she started here. So a lot of people will ask me the question of how have I gotten into art at such a young age and how have I started my own business. And although I am very young, art has been a part of my life for as long as I can remember. I have always been painting and drawing for as long as I can remember. And when I was about 12 or 13 years old, I decided that I wanted to pursue a career in art and have it as my future. So when I was 15, I began entering a lot of art contests locally and in the state. When I was 15, I won the first place Award of Excellence in Juror's Choice in the Ohio State Fair competition's 15 through 18-year-old age group. When I was also 15, I won first place in the Master's Edition Fine Art Gallery Youth Art Contest. This is where 10 copies of my pieces were made and sold to buyers throughout the country, and the profits of these pieces were sent to local food banks. When I was 17, I was chosen by a company called Celebrating Art to be published in a book about short stories and poetry. And then also when I was 17, I won 2 gold keys in the Scholastic Art and Writing Competition. These examples of my work have fueled my love of passion and motivated me to paint even more. I discovered my passion for murals when I attended a graffiti camp with Artwork Cincinnati, where we went downtown and painted walls and murals downtown. Now I've been able to be hired by local businesses and private residences to paint murals and graffiti art all downtown. These experiences have led me to my involvement in this project, and I'm super excited to see how it goes.
May I ask you one question?
Yes.
Could you please spell your last name from Mrs.
Yes. That happens a lot. OLSZEWSKI.
Thank you.
Yes.
So, as of right now, the project has removed thousands of pounds of old school gear from the attic, cleaned out and reorganized storage rooms, revitalized common spaces, and already installed a new freestanding signage section on the Carter Avenue side of the building, if any of you have rolled past to see that. I've actually got a couple of photos that I can pass around here in a moment. As of today, over 65 people, 330 volunteer hours, and over a dozen local businesses and organizations have come together to help make this project happen and ensure that it has the most impact as we can in the time that I have left before my 18th birthday. I found that while planning this project initially, I had planned on rejuvenating the community center as a reason to earn my rank. Many scouts see their projects as boxes that they can check off before being awarded the prestigious Eagle Scout rank, but as I grew more and more committed to seeing through every aspect of this project to its conclusion, I realized that the rank itself had instead become almost an excuse for me to do as much as I could for my community that I've grown up to love so very much. So if you believe that this is a project that will be good for Norwood and that will help to unite us as I think it will, then I ask that you put forward a motion in support of the project. I have here with me a couple of images to be passed around. There we go. So I can start this down this side. The first image coming around is an image of all of the desks that were removed from the community center's attic and loaded up into a recycling trailer to be removed out so that we could clear room from the attic. 100-year-old floorboards and thousands of pounds of school gear do not make a good mix in terms of future concerns. So I wanted to make sure that, first of all, the building was improved safety-wise.
Thanks, Ian.
And then the other image that I have, this was a photo taken recently of the new signage out front of the Carter Avenue side of the building. And that's the same side that the mural is tentatively going to be placed, as well as some landscaping later on. I would gladly welcome any questions or concerns you all would have for me. Okay.
Thank you, Mr.
Well,
Davis.
thank you all very, very much for giving me the opportunity to come out and speak this evening, and I hope that you consider putting this motion on to be voted upon, hopefully very, very soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next request to address council, Virginia Patterson.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I wanted to address Norwood City Council and the mayor in regards to the mural project at the Norwood Recreation Center. Ian Davis met with the Norwood Arts Board with his proposal. He provided the design that he is collaborating with artist Emma Olszewski with drawing plans and design. In addition, he has been in the process of the beautification of the recreation center, such as landscaping, new signage, and cleaning out the rooms in the center. Ian also recruited volunteers through social media for this project. I am in total support of Ian and his supporters in the wraparound services he is providing the community and beyond. I encourage Norwood City Council and the mayor to do the same. Thank you for your time and attention.
I had a quick question. if that's
Sure.
okay. Please. Did the Norwood's Art Board formally meet and ever discuss this mural?
The mural is exempt because
Yeah,
this
right.
it is a city building, but Ian did come and address us just as a formality as part of his project, but it did not need approval through the Norwood Arts Board.
Yeah, and I don't know if you can, are you able to speak if any of the other members, did they like it? Did they say it had any
Yes,
advice or anything
we
like
were
that?
all in agreement that we did like the project. Yes, we did.
Did you have any, something else that we talked, I remember being discussed when we were making the Norwood Arts Board, is not just yeses and nos, but also kind of this is a group of usually experienced people that might be able to advise on how to better improve murals.
Yes.
For this one, did you have anything that you might want to add, or was it just kind of, this is great, go?
We did like the design. We did provide some recommendations for Ian and Emma. That's totally up to them because it is, once again, it is an exempt project. It doesn't necessarily need our guidance, but I am here in total support of the design. I think it is a very family-friendly design that he's created with the historical elements of Norwood.
I'd agree. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Ms. Patterson. Our next request to address council, Jeannie Secretary.
I really, really wish mine was as wonderful as their project, but mine unfortunately is not. I want to thank you for your time this evening, and my intent tonight is to bring some attention to 3955 Ellesmere. I want to make sure that this stays on the city's radar, and I'm hoping to make you understand the duration and the scope of this horrible house. We've been plagued by this house for many years. I've lived in Norwood for 20 years. It's always been a disaster. But in the last 5 years, it's gotten worse and worse. And it started with Eric Sarver, and I'm sure everybody remembers him. He was dealing meth and pills and drug trafficking. He had weapons in his apartment on the 3rd floor with his girlfriend and 2 little kids, guns sitting right there when the police came in. This guy is hardcore. He went downtown and managed to boogie out to go to the bathroom, and we haven't seen him since. There's still kids in the house. We have Justin White, who replaced him recently. He's had 90 arrests. Then we have his girlfriend, Kirsten. She's a gem also. Timothy Smith, 150 arrests. I don't even think he's on the lease. He just kind of goes in and hangs out. And again, there's somebody living with kids on the 3rd floor. Let's go to the next one. Williams Avenue School. That's 420 feet from this house. You can throw a rock and hit Williams Avenue Community Garden. I found needles. I find needles in the garden. I find them on the street. So this house is a nuisance for many, many reasons, and I don't think anyone's going to argue about this. My question is, how many police runs? How many agencies from our city are involved in this? Health department, we've got lead issues. There's no electric on the 1st floor as of last week. Like I said, kids living there, dogs living there. They have a generator running the 1st floor. There's standing water in the back, poison ivy going up the side of the house, couch in the yard, the roof's a mess, siding's falling down. It's crazy. And a couple years ago, the health department, I believe the health department, went around giving citations to people wanting them to improve their homes. One was across the street. The Eggers had to go and spend tens and thousands of dollars to get it painted. That was on the radar. They weren't going to do it that year, but they went ahead and did it. But somehow we skipped $39.55. How the heck did this happen? So the problem here is not really the tenants. I can't believe I'm saying it, but it's Nick Bucaccio. He's the owner. He's a slumlord. He's a horrible person. He's been aware of everything going on. He gets notices from the city informing him of all the violations. The police are there constantly. I gave every one of you just a few pictures that I think are funny. It's a nightmare. It's just a nightmare. Cars running up and down. They've cut out shrubs so they can do the drug deal around the back. My question to you is, how are we going to come together and figure this out? I feel like Norwood has a bunch of tools in the toolbox. We need to figure out how we're going to address this and what we're going to do about it. This isn't a matter of if something happens, it's a matter of when. Something is going to happen. We see drug deals constantly. It's comical. I can't even let kids walk on that side of the street because you never know if he's going to fly down the street, down his driveway and hit one of them. This is a huge problem that has to be addressed. Quality Inn was closed down. They padlocked that place. Can't we do something like that? Can't we padlock this building? The owner, as I said, is very aware of everything going on. He is allowing drug dealers to live in this place over and over again. And just when you think one drug dealer is pretty bad, he manages to go to the bottom of the pond and find somebody even worse. It's unbelievable. So what I want you to do is think about this. Put on your thinking caps. Let's come together. Let's figure it out. Everybody has a little piece of this. But there has to be a way we can close this down. And I think going after the owner is how we're going to do it. So, any questions? Yes,
Ridge.
sir.
Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate that. I appreciate you coming today, and I feel for your situation.
It's not just my situation. We have 10 neighbors
Yes, ma'am.
that see it constantly.
So my advice to you today is keep calling the police. Make a record. This can be shut down. You will get relief. We've had 2 houses in Ward 4 shut down, and personally. So call the police like you're doing. Make a record of this, and you will get results. And Norwood doesn't allow this. So just keep fighting your fight. We're with you.
We need to send a loud and clear message to people who are coming in thinking they're going to do drugs. Loud and clear saying Norwood isn't going to tolerate it. We aren't going to put up with this. And by closing down that house, he'll sell. If that's ideally what we want to do, we want Nick to sell. Because if he goes in and does his lead abatement, which he has said he's doing himself, he's going to get more in there. The same thing is going to happen. It's a revolving drug house.
I'd like to speak unfinished business, please.
Please.
I'll speak of unfinished business, please.
Thank you, Mr. Leonard.
Same with me.
Thank you, Mrs. Sickinger.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next request to address council, Pastor Sonny James.
Pastor Sonny James, 1830 Hopkins Avenue. You know, as I go around our city, I find things to celebrate. I find people to applaud. And it just seems like no matter what seems to be said or done, you know, people that look like me people that think like me. First, let me just say to the young man and the young lady that are pursuing their dreams, I applaud that wholeheartedly. And to the residents that have concerns, we all have a right to voice our concern. What angers me and what troubles me is that we are able as a city to give attention to things that we believe are important. And we applaud these things. But the last time I checked, there are a whole lot of black people that are sick and tired of the N-word being used. I have sat back and, I even got a nice letter. I applaud you for the letter. But there are people outside of Norwood that have been wondering, why is it that the reputation of Norwood continues to this day? Now, I have asked numerous of times, let's come together. I have told many of my peers, stay out of Norwood, let us handle it internally. But I want to see how many of you that applaud wonderful and nice projects stand up and say, whether you're Republican, Democrat, or Independent, when the N-word or the thought of the N-word is even used, if the President of the United States of America can say we at the highest level have got to work together to eradicate systemic racism, but yet in Norwood, the highest office that we would have would find it appropriate to divert it and say, well, let's them handle it in-house. Guys, I have stood in this community and I have stood behind our leadership. And folks often wonder, why is he always so dag-blasted angry? I'm angry because when good people, heavens, Al Capone, they said he was a great guy. He just had one bad habit. He had people killed for a living. But other than that, he's a great dude. In Norwood, we have great people who love America, they love Norwood, and they love everything about it. But I'm not even asking anymore. You don't have to come together. We'll bring them in. And then just don't talk to the whole world. Guys, I'm demanding that we come together now. Don't worry, I won't ask again. Let's come together and let us formulate racial equality and equity amongst all people. And let's say, if the rumors are not true, let's say they're not true. But for history's sake, we've been hearing the same complaints over and over, and where have we lined the streets to challenge it? Every organization, Norwood Together, ASAP Norwood, the mayor, whoever, and all of our peers outside. Let's come together, guys. Racial equity, we've got to make this a priority. I love my community, and I believe that a lot of people in this community love it just as much, maybe even more. But this will be my last time coming and asking. Please, let's work together. You're not going to avoid me because I ain't going anywhere. And as they say on the street, I ain't scared. So let's come together, please, and sit down with every facet of Norwood. And let's just talk about it. Heavens, don't you want to shut me up? Then let's do something different. Treat people fair. Treat people equal. And maybe then We don't have to be so afraid of one or two bad guys. Because if you get 100 of them coming in Norwood, what are we going to do? Don't call me then. I'll be at Chipotle eating my favorite burrito. Let's work together, guys. God bless you all. And I'm here.
Thank you, Pastor James. Moving on to item I, reports of standing committees of council, law and ordinance committee meeting, August 16, 2021. Mr. Joyce.
August 16th, 2021, to the Honorable Council of the City of Norwood. We, your Committee of Law, Ordinance, and Human Resources, to whom it was referred, tobacco licensing discussion and a change to council rules. Beg to leave to submit the following report. Changes were made to adjust the fee from $400 to $150 while that would be the annual fee for the licensing, while increases were made on the fine structure from $350 to $400, as well as $600 to $750. We discussed a change to change council rules to allow a blanket system to file letters as read. We decided to stick with a request and vote format and ask President of Council to observe council members for that request. We all felt that residents should be heard. Respectfully submitted, Matthew Geraci, Chairperson, Mr. Bonzel, Mr. Gabbard, and Mr. Braden.
Thank you, Mr. Tracy. Mr. Thompson.
Move we receive and file the report.
Motion by Mr. Thompson to receive and file the report. May I have a second? Mr. DeNardo?
Yes, please.
Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DeNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye. Motion passes. Moving on to item K, second reading of ordinances and resolutions. Item K1, a resolution encouraging all Norwood residents to be vaccinated against the COVID-19 virus. Mr. Thompson.
I move we have the second and third reading of this ordinance with the first of today's readings in full, please.
Motion by Mr. Thompson. May I have a second? Mr. Bonzel.
Thank you.
Second by Mr. Bonzel. Any discussion? Mr. Tracy.
I will disagree with the second and third readings on this. We could possibly have a second reading. I don't think it's our job to be encouraging or demanding or mandating any of these viruses, as it's a personal choice for somebody to get vaccinated. It's a personal choice for somebody to vaccinate their child. I've never gone after anti-vaxxers. You know, you do what you want to do. It's your body. You shouldn't be forced to put something in your body or encouraged by anybody else to put something in your body. That would be like me going and talking to council members and saying, you know what, I think everybody should smoke. And I think we should make a mandate to smoke. I think we should make a mandate to dip. I think we should make a mandate that everybody in this council chamber have an energy drink before every council meeting, or that we have coffee before every council meeting. You may think it's ridiculous, my analogies, but the analogy is the same.
Thank you, Mr. Tracy. Anyone else? Mr. Thompson.
Just wanted to briefly point out, I won't go into everything Mr. Tracy said, but this isn't a mandate. Where we understand that this is a choice that people make, and we're just encouraging people to take this step. When you hear the ordinance, you'll hear reasoning behind it. If Mr. Tracy doesn't want to support this ordinance, he is very welcome to vote against it.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Anyone else? Mr. Tracy.
Well, no, I understand it's not a mandate. That's why I used the word encourage a few times. However, we should not be, as a council chamber, as officials, encouraging anything for anybody.
Thank you, Mr. Tracy. Anyone else? Mr. Bonzel?
Thank you, Mr. President. So I will be voting for this resolution. And
I almost wonder if we could have got a new copy of it to add that the Pfizer vaccine was fully approved by the FDA. However, I think the resolution stands on its own, even without that extra point. So, yeah, I'll be supporting it, and I do encourage Norwood residents to not speed in the neighborhoods either. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Bonzel. Anyone else? Motion on the floor by Mr. Thompson, second by Mr. Bonzel. Have the second, third reading, and second reading in full. Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
No.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting, we have 6 ayes, 1 no. Motion passes. May we have the second, third reading read in its entirety.
A resolution encouraging, we're loud today, all Norwood residents to be vaccinated against the COVID-19 virus. Whereas vaccines against COVID-19 have proven to be safe and effective in a number of national and international trials, and whereas vaccines have been shown to protect against infection and serious illness from the Delta variant, and whereas breakthrough infections account for a very small percentage of those who have been vaccinated and tend to be less severe in nature than those who are not vaccinated, and whereas the recent spike in hospitalizations from COVID-19 are almost exclusively unvaccinated patients, and whereas a highly vaccinated population helps protect those, like children, under the age of 12 and adults who cannot receive the vaccine. And whereas the Norwood Health Department offers free walk-in vaccinations, now therefore be it resolved, the Council of the City of Norwood, State of Ohio, the Council of the City of Norwood urges all citizens who meet eligibility requirements to get a COVID-19 vaccine to protect themselves and help to prevent the spread of this deadly disease. A resolution encouraging all Norwood residents to be vaccinated against the COVID-19 virus.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. Mr. Thompson.
I would move that we pass the resolution.
Motion by Mr. Thompson to pass the resolution. Mr. DiNardo.
A second, please.
Second by Mr. DiNardo. Any discussion? Mr. Tracy.
All right, let's break this resolution down a little bit here. This resolution states that it is shown to protect against infection and serious illness from the Delta variant. I can tell you that I want to know if any of council members who support this have the research on them to prove that this is the Delta variant, because I can tell you right now, I have here, let me pull it up real quick. And this is from an institution, by the way. Probably should have pulled this up earlier. Something that states that, however, we do not sequence viral specimens, so we cannot tell which strain, original Delta variant, etc. it is. Our tests perform equally to all known variants. That's from a hospital saying that they don't test for the Delta variant. So how are they knowing that this is the Delta variant that's going around? How do they know it's the original? How do they not know that it's something other than the Delta? They don't. Okay? So we don't know that this protects from Delta variant. We don't know that it protects from any other variant. Came straight from a hospital. Right there, black and white. Let's see, another one on here. States that a highly vaccinated population helps to protect those. Absolutely it does, but so do those that have had the virus, because having the virus is the same as the vaccine. The problem with the United States, no matter who you are, is that we don't track who's been vaccinated and count that as a vaccine, or who's had the COVID virus and count that as a vaccine, whereas Europe and other countries do. If you've had the vaccine, you have the antibodies within your system of that same vaccine. So now you're just putting double the vaccine into your body. It doesn't make sense. You don't double things and hope that it double protects you. It just doesn't work that way. So if you've had COVID, you've got the antibodies, same as if you got vaccinated. and the spike in hospitalizations, the only reason there's a spike in hospitalizations is because of low staff. Beds are not counted by how many physical number of beds you have in a hospital. Beds are counted by the number of people that can take care of a patient. When you have a nurse working on 5 or 6 patients because you're short-staffed, you can't bring any more patients in. You have to cut it off. That is why the hospitals seem to be overrun or seem to have a high number of people, is because of low staffing within these hospitals. Because hospitals don't want to pay a proper wage for nurses. They don't want to protect their nurses when the nurses request the protection. But they want to protect the nurses when they don't request it. There's my issue. So, again, the hospitals are only overrun because of short staffing, not because of their number of physical beds. It's not that. It's the number of personnel to take care of them. And we don't have that. None of Ohio has it. None of the United States has it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tracy. Mr. Brady.
Thank you, Mr. President. I can appreciate this resolution and see a need. I appreciate the sentiment. This is the reason why I enjoyed this, because you can take 7 people in this room and we can all have different opinions. We all have our own opinion. I personally am vaccinated. It was a choice for me. It was the right choice for me. I don't believe that I can tell someone else or offer I don't think it is up to me to encourage other people to get vaccinated. So I support this. I appreciate this. No disrespect to anyone who supports this, but I won't be recommending anyone get vaccinated today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brady. Mr. DiNardo, you had your hand up?
Yeah. I was just going to suggest to the other council members that we're discussing whether we want to support the resolution for encouraging Norwood residents to be vaccinated, not necessarily discussing the efficacy of the vaccine or the details of the virus itself. So I'm just hoping we can I think we have a bunch of different opinions, it sounds like. Let's just vote on it rather than discuss the vaccination itself.
Thank you, Mr. DiNardo. Anyone else? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bunzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
No.
Mr. Kelch?
No.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
No, ma'am.
All members present voting, we have 4 ayes, 3 noes. Motion fails.
No.
I'm sorry,
If the
motion
resolution
passes.
passes.
My bad. Okay. Moving on to L1, introductory reading of ordinance and resolutions. Ordinance adding chapter 1761, the Norwood Codified Ordinance to establish the tobacco product sales licensing program. Mr. Bonds.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would move that we have the first reading of the ordinance.
Motion to have the first reading by Mr. Bonzel. Mr. Thompson.
I would second that.
Second by Mr. Thompson. Any discussion? Okay. Mr. Dracy, you had your hand up?
I'm sorry, was that, how many readings was that for?
Just one.
The first?
Yes. Mr. Bonzel?
Thank you, Mr. President. So we have Brian Williamson here, our Health Commissioner. I was just hoping, Mr. Williamson, if you don't mind, would you mind kind of giving kind of your opinion of this?
Are you asking for?
Yeah, just if you have any comments about it. I mean, maybe just a statement that the Board of Health acted on it, or?
Since the first draft, there were consultations to where the concerns that were addressed at the previous council meeting were discussed. So they have, sorry. So basically after the first council meeting, the concerns were discussed. I also have Ms. Wendy Hyde here as the context expert, but as far as the health department's role in an ordinance like this, one of the tasks of the state health department is limiting access for underage people to tobacco. This would be an extension of that role to bring it under a local ordinance to where we're looking at about 20 facilities here. So as far as the concern with lowering the license fee to $150, my main concern there would be that as long as that covers the 18 to 21-year-old people that do the compliance checks, I am completely fine with what was recommended.
We were unable to speak with Mr. Williams as he wasn't at the meeting himself. And I did have a few questions that I know that your counterpart couldn't answer or wouldn't be able to answer because she seemed to have the same information that you gave to us at the last council meeting. And, you know, for I think it was 5 years, we had an interim health commissioner, I believe. So for those 5 years, that interim health commissioner may not have made contact with the state licensing board. And I know you're fresh into it this year, and you know that's something that I would hope that before anything like this comes up, that we work with the state to do those checks the way we're supposed to do it, outside of creating our own legislation to do that right now. And you know, it's hard to work with an interim health commissioner. While I know the interim health commissioner well, like him, absolutely 10 out of 10, great doctor. You know, he was interim, and he was kind of, I think, just kind of doing the basics to keep it going until we found somebody to run the department, which I don't blame him for. Dr. Perino, I love him. He's a great guy. I wish he would have stayed on, to be honest, to be nothing against you, to be our full health commissioner, but I know he's got his own practice to go through and deal with. However, there are some things that I wanted to talk to you about in the meeting that I couldn't discuss with you in the meeting.
To be a health department, one of the mandates is to have an administrative triage. So that is an explanation for some of the changes that we've had to make as we face things like public. Basically, as we move forward with the Norwood City Health Department, since I've been there, we've had to face requirements like public health accreditation, state requirements to have an administrative triage. So that's part of the reason we've had to make some staffing changes. But to direct attention to the tobacco regulations in Ohio, when I look at the state regulations for tobacco control of access to people 21 years and younger, we have the most watered down version that Ohio could have chosen at that point. So I believe that's why there's interest from CDC and other state organizations to provide support to local health departments that are willing to take on this work. Comparing our health department to bigger health departments, I can take this program on easier than a larger department. For me, this is 20 visits, plus 20 visits from a person to do non-compliance checks. So this is a manageable workload that our department can take on and have huge benefits in the future. So that's my interest in this program.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I did want to kind of just give an overview of kind of the committee of what we talked about, and just kind of quickly just the changes to the ordinance. So, you know, as a committee, there were concerns about the cost of it, and as it was alluded to by Mr. Williamson, we changed the application fee for the tobacco retailer license from $400 to $150. So the thought of that was just to reduce the burden on the businesses, and we still think that, especially the first year, for sure, all of those extra first-year expenses, like that we're going to get grants to be able to do that. So various groups have come forward to commit to providing grants to the city, to the health department, to be able to kind of get this thing off and running. And there is some concern about the cost being too low, but, I think overall for the committee, it was much better to have a lower cost and get this thing moving than to really fight over that. I personally think it's going to be a very good program. I think that, one of the benefits of the ordinance that Mr. Dracy had asked is that we have quarterly reports from the health department about how the tobacco retailer license is going. So appreciate Mr. Dracy's thoughts on there. And then Mr. Dracy also had comments about how we really should be, educating parents about, youth smoking. And I think that was a great idea as well. So I think there'll probably be more follow-up on that as well. So, this is the first reading today. I personally think it's the changes work. I think we're still a good ordinance, and I'll be supporting it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Anyone else? We have a motion by Mr. Bonzel, second by Mr. Thompson. Have a first reading. Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. DeRacy?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye, and motion passes. May we have the first reading?
Ordinance adding Chapter 1761 to the Norwood Codified Ordinances to establish the Tobacco Products Sales Licensing Program.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. Moving on to item L2, an ordinance establishing priority of property tax exemptions granted for parcels of real property located at 4590 Beach Street within the city of Norwood.
Good evening, Mr. President. You guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, Council. So this ordinance, as I assume what will follow next on the agenda, relates to the Factory 52 project, which we've discussed a few times before, on the old U.S. playing card site. So this one is a little bit of a technical ordinance here. If you recall, we provided a property tax abatement in the form of what's typically called a CRA exemption or a community reinvestment area exemption. That is going to exempt the property owners from tax for a period of 15 years, assuming that they comply, they build the project, and they build it in accordance with the agreement, the CRA agreement that we entered into, or that the city entered into with the developer. In addition to the CRA exemption, there is also a TIF. And in connection with TIF, you're required to make payments in lieu of tax. Those payments are in the amount you would have otherwise paid as real property taxes. Those are then going to be diverted to pay debt for public infrastructure improvements, which we'll discuss in a bit. This ordinance here is to have legislation that clarifies that the exemption provided by the CRA basically takes precedent or is superior to the exemption provided by the TIF and the requirement to make service payments. So even though under a TIF you're required to make payments in lieu of tax as opposed to taxes, that obligation will exist from years 1 through 30, but in years 1 through 15 it will be exempted by the CRA exemption. So this is just legislation to clarify that the CRA exemption exempts the property owners from making the payments in lieu of tax in years 1 through 15 of the sort of combined exemption period. Hopefully that all made some sense, but if that wasn't clear, I'm happy to repeat that and maybe simplify it. Yes, ma'am.
Can I get your name again?
Sure, it's Patrick Woodside.
Thank you.
Was that less than optimally clear? I'm happy to give it another go.
Mr. Thompson?
Right, now, thank you for explaining that. Just for we've been kind of part of this the entire time, this was just the way it was going to work the whole time?
Correct.
This is just clarifying it.
Exactly. This is so that let's say it more simple. The end result is during years 1 through 15, essentially, there will not be real property tax payments made. There will be school payments made, but otherwise they'll be exempt from tax. There's a small little loophole in there. They'll pay some tax on the incremental value of the land, but assume for practical purposes, they'll be exempt for those first 15 years. In years 16 through 30, they will, instead of paying taxes, pay payments in lieu of tax. Those payments will then go to pay debt service on debt that will be issued to pay for a portion of the public infrastructure improvements that support the private elements of the project. Is that better? Right.
Thank you.
So this is the first reading. I'm happy to answer any questions of that one. I think, again, it's pretty technical, but that's the purpose of it.
Mr. Bonzel?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. Yeah, it definitely makes sense, and for sure. Do you need all 3 readings today? Do you need this passed today, or?
No, we're having, if you would like to, we could do all 3. We're trying to, be sensitive to the fact that the preferences have multiple, but this one, again, is pretty technical in nature, and it is in accordance with the understanding that we've always had throughout this process. So if you think it's simpler at this point to have all 3 readings, that would not cause any issues for our overall timing or anything like that. Like I said, the CRA and the TIF are already in place, so this is just a clarifying of which takes priority over the other.
Mr. Bonzel?
Yeah, and thank you so much. Yeah, I was kind of surprised to see the ordinance personally, because exactly what you just said. Every intention of the other ordinances that we passed is that this is exactly how it would work. So, and I'm sure it's some legal thing that you have to have for clarification, just to have the I's dotted and the T's crossed. So
and just so you know, time-wise, with the way we did it, this should be the case. But the way these things are applied to at the state and through the county, it's just to make sure that if there ever were a question of what is sort of takes priority, this is just to make sure that there's basically a declaration by this council that that's the case.
So just one more follow-up, if I could. Just to sing on a question. So if we did 2 readings today and did another reading at the next meeting, that would be just fine? It wouldn't cause any delays whatsoever?
Correct.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Bonzel. Mr. Tracy?
Are you guys heading out after this is read?
We have one more.
Well, after both of them, I guess.
I could stick around if you'd like to discuss it.
About 5 minutes, if you could.
Sure.
Any other questions? Mr. Bonzel?
Yeah, so I would move that we have the first and second reading of the ordinance.
We have a motion by Mr. Bonzel to have the first and second reading. May I have a second? Mr. DiNardo?
Yes, please.
Second by Mr. DiNardo. Any further discussion? Mr. Brady?
Thank you. I was a little slow with the hand there. So I understand first and second reading. I'm okay with just having all 3 readings and passing this and getting it off our agenda and moving on. So is that a problem with somebody tonight? Let's just get it off our agenda here and move on here. So if that's not a problem, I'd say have all 3 readings, just send your motion and let's get it over with. So get it off our books and move on to something different. So that would be my suggestion. But if not, I'm okay. I'm with you guys either way.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Brady.
I'm fine with that. I'll be willing to amend the motion.
Good.
Yes.
So Mr. Bonzel is going to amend his motion to have all 3 readings? Mr. Tracy?
Are we at discussion yet?
I thought Mr. Bonzel was
Yeah,
going
we're
to
in
answer.
discussion. Yeah, we're in discussion.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Do we have,
That's my question.
I was gonna say that-
One,
I thought
or
DiNardo-
I'm okay with it too.
okay.
So you're amending your
I'm
motion.
amending, and then he seconded.
Yes, I would.
And you're amending your, so,
All right.
motion by Mr. Bonzel, second by Mr. DiNardo, have all, suspend rules and have all 3 readings. Mr. Tracy?
Do we need to or do we need to amend this before we do anything? Because on the second page where it'll be signing, it states September versus August. If we're going to pass it with all 3 readings tonight, we might want to amend that to August if we have to. I don't know if we have to per the law department, or if we can just pass it as is and change that later.
It's under my attestation.
Mr. Moore?
It's the attestation, it's not effective language, just Maria, when she signs it, can cross that out and put August.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that we didn't miss something and have to come back and redo everything.
Thank you, Mr. Tracy, for pointing that out. Any other discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Coach?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye. Motion passes. May we have all 3 readings?
An ordinance establishing priority of property tax exemptions granted for parcels of real property located at 4590 Beach Street within the city of Norwood, Ohio. An ordinance establishing priority of property tax exemptions granted for parcels of real property located at 4590 Beach Street within the city of Norwood, Ohio. An ordinance establishing priority of property tax exemptions granted for parcels of real property located at 4590 Beach Street within the city of Norwood, Ohio.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. Mr. Braden?
Motion, we pass the ordinance.
Motion by Mr. Braden to pass the ordinance. Mr. Bonzo?
I'd like to second, please.
Second by Mr. Bonzo. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonzo?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Dracy?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present. The ordinance passes. Moving on to item L3. An ordinance authorizing execution and delivery of redevelopment agreement with Playing Card Partners LLC, authorizing cooperation with the Port of Greater Cincinnati Development Authority and the Columbus Franklin County Finance Authority to facilitate the issuance of Port Authority development revenue bonds for the purpose of paying the cost of certain public improvements, authorizing the execution and delivery of tax increment financing and cooperative agreement and all other documents and instruments necessary to effect such financing, authorizing and approving related matters, and declaring an emergency.
So,
I was going to ask if we could hear from Mr. Woodson.
yeah, I did. So again, this is related to what they're calling the Factory 52 project, the U.S. Playing Card Site redevelopment. And there's sort of two elements to this. The first is we have a development agreement that we're currently working on. We're hoping to get a draft over. Whoever would like to have it, we'll have it on file, obviously, before the meeting. But any thoughts you have on that are fine. We'll have it to Keith for his review with sufficient time to review before next meeting, and on file for review by the council. The arrangements in that agreement are pretty much, what you would expect. There's sort of maybe three elements to it. One is that the city is agreeing through the tax increment financing to basically pledge the tax increment financing revenues toward the repayment of debt that is going to be issued to pay for a portion of the public infrastructure cost to support the private project. There is, on the other kind of side of that, there's an agreement by the developer to develop the property. We're working on finalizing their budgets that we're going to include as an exhibit to the agreement, as well as their timeline. And the third part of this that we've discussed as well, but I don't know in how much detail, I can't recall. They have requested, and we're going to agree to form a new community authority. Essentially what that authority is an entity that will, in this case, it'll put a sales tax on the sales, within this development only, to be used to finance programming out there so they can have events and other things of that nature out there. But that's basically the first portion of this ordinance. The other portion of it is authorizing a cooperative arrangement with the Cincinnati Port Authority and the Columbus Port Authority. And this is similar to Cornerstone and Linden Point, where the actual issuer of the debt is going to be those two port authorities. They're using two port authorities because those two port authorities bond funds sort of want the it's almost like diversifying their portfolio, because it was a large amount of money for them to take on for a single project, so they're both going to participate. They will be issuing bonds. The city, in that cooperative arrangement, will agree to pledge the TIF revenues and to send the TIF revenues to a trustee who will then use it to pay the bonds. So it's similar to the city issuing bonds that are repaid with TIF revenues, but instead of the city being the issuer, we go through the bond fund that has some additional security, amounts of money that are there that can reduce interest rates, make the bonds more marketable. And as always, the only financial obligation of the city is to provide the TIF funds and any additional funds if there's a shortfall of the responsibility of the developer. So there's no financial obligation of the city outside of those payments in lieu of tax that are made by currently the developer, but the developer and then any future owners of the property. So that's it in a nutshell, but happy to provide any additional detail at this point for discussion purposes so that we can make sure that we're proceeding in the way that everybody agrees we should to the next meeting.
Mr. Bonzo.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you so much. So does this ordinance actually create that new entity that would oversee or will we have additional ordinances in the future to consider that?
We'll do that in the future. So the way, just the outline of that basically is that it's the developer, but the owner of the property essentially petitions the city to implement it, and then we'll have some documentation that will be recorded against the property that will require the payment of this. They're called, they're like taxes, but, sales tax, but they call it a new community charge. But yeah, that'll be a separate thing. There's some reasons we had originally thought that was more incorporated here with the debt, but we did it a little bit differently.
Oh, and that's fine. I just think that's going to be that's kind of a pretty big conceptual thing to kind of grasp when it comes to that and what it's doing. So, I would actually even recommend potentially us having maybe either Finance Committee or the Economic Development Committee, one of the two, just have a quick discussion on it and kind of get some more details. But before that comes up, so
that's outside. This is
and that's fine. That's why I wanted to make sure. And then the other thing is just what's your timing on this? This is not a rush on this either? Or?
Well, we have anticipated the 2 readings, just in case there were any comments today. But the plan is to have this approved and it being an emergency ordinance, having it be effective as of the meeting on the 14th. So, and plus we don't have the documents in shape yet to be on file with some of that information. So we can't do a final vote today anyway. But yes, I think to keep on the schedule, the hope, if you're willing, is to actually consider it for approval at the September 14th meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Bonsall. Mr. Brady?
Thank you, Mr. President. So I'm reaching my pay grade here. So my question for the law department, through the chair, please. Are you working with this at all? Have you seen this? Is this something that you guys are working with the law department, or is this? I just would like to hear your statement about this ordinance.
Mr. Moore?
I've not seen a draft of the redevelopment agreement.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Anyone else? Thank you.
Yes, sir. Okay. I appreciate the time. Thanks all.
Thank you. Mr. DiNardo?
Make a motion for 2 readings, please.
Motion by Mr. DiNardo to have the first and second reading. Mr. Brady?
I'll second that.
Second by Mr. Brady. Any discussion? Please call roll.
Mr. Bonsall?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye. Motion passes. May we have the first and second reading, Mrs. Williams?
You all with these long names. All right. An ordinance authorizing the execution and delivery of a redevelopment agreement with Playing Card Partners, LLC, authorizing cooperation with the Port of Greater Cincinnati Development Authority and the Columbus-Franklin County Finance Authority to facilitate the issuance of Port Authority development revenue bonds for the purpose of paying the costs of certain public improvements, authorizing the execution and delivery of a tax increment financing and cooperative agreement, and all other documents and instruments necessary to effect such financing, authorizing and approving related matters, and declaring an emergency. An ordinance authorizing the execution and delivery of a redevelopment agreement with Playing Card Partners, LLC, authorizing cooperation with the Port of Greater Cincinnati Development Authority and the Columbus-Franklin County Finance Authority to facilitate the issuance of Port Authority development revenue bonds for the purpose of paying the costs of certain public improvements, authorizing the execution and delivery of a tax increment financing and cooperative agreement, and all other documents and instruments necessary to effect such financing, authorizing and approving related matters, and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. Moving on to Mr. Gracie. Moving on to item L4, a resolution declaring it to be the desire of council that Halloween trick-or-treat should be celebrated between the hours of 6 p.m. and 8 p.m. on Sunday, October 31st, 2021. Mr. Dracy.
I'll request all 3 readings on this ordinance, and to try and give Ms. Williams a break. Just the whereas portion with the title, so you don't have to read it all.
For how many readings?
Just 3 readings.
Do 3 readings? Okay.
1 with just the whereas.
Gotcha.
May I have a second? Mr. Kelch.
I'll second that.
Any discussion? Mr. Gabbard.
we do realize that we're still in August, right? I mean, we've got 2 months before. So, I mean, I'm okay with it. It seemed like it's awfully early, to put that out there and then people forget, but we'll still get questions. That's all right, but I'm just good with it.
Mr. Tracy, I saw your hand up first. Mrs. Williams.
As a mom whose children are going to start asking real soon what time they get to go, it's great that it gets done early. Just saying.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. Mr. Tracy?
If Target and Walmart can put their Christmas decorations out in October, I think we can start thinking of Halloween in August.
Thank you, Mr. Tracy. Mr. Bonzo?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. So I did ask for this resolution to be drafted. I asked for it early. I was actually not expecting it until September, but thank you, Mr. Moore. This is out, but Mr. Moore's got it done much earlier, even with Tim Gary that was out last week. So yeah, very efficient. So, but anyways, yeah, the intent of this is so we didn't forget about. I didn't make sure we got it done with. It got taken care of. 3 readings or not, I think it's fine.
Thank you, Mr. Brayton.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Gabbard, you could always vote no. Sorry. It's okay.
I can't hear you.
You can always vote no.
Oh, I might.
Anyone else? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonzo?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson? Oh, wait, no, we didn't get a second.
Yeah, Mr. Kelch?
Oh, he did? I'm sorry, I didn't hear it. Okay, I'm going to start from scratch. Bonzo? Mr.
Yes.
Bonzo?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Brayton?
Absolutely.
All members present voting aye. Motion passes. May we have all 3 readings?
A resolution declaring it to be the desire of council that Halloween trick-or-treat be celebrated between the hours of 6 p.m. and 8 p.m. on Sunday, October 31st, 2021. Whereas the mayor of the city of Norwood and the Norwood Police Division have determined that Halloween trick-or-treat should be celebrated between the hours of 6 o'clock p.m. and 8 o'clock p.m. on Sunday, October 31st, 2021. A resolution declaring it to be the desire of council that Halloween trick-or-treat be celebrated between the hours of 6 p.m. and 8 p.m. on Sunday, October 31st, 2021. A resolution declaring it to be the desire of council that Halloween trick-or-treat be celebrated between the hours of 6 p.m. and 8 p.m. on Sunday, October 31st, 2021.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. Mr. Kelch?
Make a motion to pass.
Motion by Mr. Kelch. Pass the resolution. May I have a second? Mr. Tracy?
I'll second.
Any further discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonzo?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Brayton?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye. Resolution passes. Moving on to item M, administrative reports. Mayor Schneider.
Thank you, President Miracle. A lot of things going on in the city right now. I guess first I would talk about streets and preventive maintenance. They're doing a lot of preventive maintenance work, which means crack filling, and it's not perfect. And people are making it very aware, making the administration very aware, to Public Works, that it's not perfect. But it is preventive maintenance that the engineering firm has told us we need to do in certain areas. We have 60 miles of streets. We're not going to get to everybody's street all at once. And it's going to take us a few years to probably get to your street. So the preventive maintenance work that we're doing is to try to make them last at least a few years longer, so then we can come in and do a mill and overlay. But think about it, 60 miles. And these streets have not been repaved for years and years and years. We are way behind on where we should be with our streets. We don't have an unlimited bank account. We are trying to maximize the effect we can make with the money that we have each year. And we have a pretty good, what I consider to be a pretty good outlook, a pretty good forecast for getting streets done. We've done more paving in the last 2 years than we've done in many years. And the forecast, and when I say the forecast, I'm looking at the amount of money that this council has said we'll put towards streets on a regular basis, recognizing that every time we step on somebody's porch, they say, fix my street. And we're working on that. But the preventive maintenance work that we do is not going to be perfect. And we recognize you're not going to be totally satisfied until we totally mill, grind, pave, and do all that. But we can't do it all. We just can't. So, you know, I know a lot of you have gotten calls. I've gotten a lot of calls. I've had a lot of discussions with people. I know that Public Works has had a lot of calls on it. But we can only do so much. Remember, when everybody starts telling you, you know, we need to get our street repaved, 60 miles, we're behind. We're working on it. We're working on getting Montgomery Road repaved, hopefully to minimal expense to us, to do corp line to corp line. Instead of doing it in 3 segments like it was done 25 years ago, we're hoping to do Montgomery Road, all of Montgomery Road. 562, the lateral, it's getting major work completed on it in the next few years. We'll continue to push for 561, and we're pushing for all those residential streets. We want the streets paved just as much as all of our community members do, and we'll do it as quickly as we can, but we are going to have to do preventive maintenance on streets, crack filling, which isn't the best, but it's what's required. So those are important parts to remember. 60 miles of streets that, and I hate to say it, but they've been neglected. You know, there hasn't been a lot of money put into them, trying to get back on track, and it's going to take a few years to get back on track. It's not going to happen in the 4 years, my 4 years here. It's going to have to happen over the next 12 years, you know, 15, 16. It's going to take a long time to get us back in shape, but we're working on it, and we're making good progress, and we'll continue to do that. So talking about, I'll say, one of the other things, we heard a discussion about a home in Norwood that's presenting challenges to the community. You're absolutely right, there's challenges. It's not just, this is one home in the city of Norwood, but we've had this multiple times through the years. If you talk to the police department, you talk to the police chief, he'll tell you, we've had this home, different actors, different characters, but we've had the same situation at different times, and we've tried to do what we can. There are things called civil liberties. There are definitely hindrances to your community, sending an attack force and telling you, get out of your house and you're not allowed to live here. There are reasons why the city moves in the way that it moves. And it protects all of us, all of the citizens that are law-abiding citizens, as well as it protects some of the bad characters. So we've got to really continue to work. And the city is working in multiple different areas to try to get that taken care of. I wish I could say it was a quicker process, but it's not a really quick process, and there's some reasons why it's not a really quick process. So we are working on that. So that's an important part to think about. Urging people, I as the mayor, and I'll say it to whatever camera's on or and through this microphone, I urge all of you, everyone out there, to get vaccinated. I do want people to get vaccinated. I think it's a way to end this and to move on. And I think that if we had more people vaccinated, we'd be in a better position right now. If everybody would have jumped on the bandwagon earlier. I understand all the differences and the questions that people have, and I can respect that. But I still urge my family members and everyone, all of my loved ones and my community members, please get vaccinated. I think it is the right way to go. So that's an important part. From the mayor of the city of Norwood, absolutely. Then talking about the tobacco ordinance, I'll say that from me as the mayor and from Mary Ronan, our superintendent of the schools, I would say, and this is a letter, I'll read it, it's from Mary Ronan, from her office. A tobacco retail license for the city of Norwood will protect Norwood youth by filling the gaps in enforcement and increasing tobacco retail compliance with local, state, and federal tobacco laws. Most importantly, not selling tobacco products to underage youth. So Mary Ronan and I, as the mayor, absolutely support this. We hope that you'll pass this and we'll move on. And I understand you're going to move with the speed or as it should, but you definitely, if somebody asks you, you can say, definitely the mayor supports it, and definitely the superintendent of schools supports it. So I would highly recommend that we move forward with it. I think that's an important part. Talking about projects, and I'm going to open this phone up because I've got a bunch of notes on here on what projects are going on, and hopefully you guys have been to some of the parks and some of the buildings and witnessed some of this. But There's work being done at Waterworks, and there's much more work that's being planned. We're going to replace some of the concrete around the pool deck. That's going to happen this fall. Can't do it during pool season. So we've got a lot of work going on there. Interior painting, we've got the new canopy was installed down there. The concrete starts in September. The health department, we talked about having a walk-up vaccination clinic. Well, now you can actually walk up the handicapped ramp. There's a new handicapped ramp that was put in at the health department and new steps put in there. I should say, they were supposed to pour today, and actually I didn't go past, I went past this morning, but I didn't go past later today. But I think there's all new concrete there, so I need to preface that. But I know that it's all set up for it. They're also working on the lights. If any of you went to the health department for your vaccination shot, they did it in the little auditorium they have there, and they're replacing lights in there. They were 1970 globe lamps in there, and they're fixing those to increase the lighting and make that. And that's actually, if you think about it, that's a nice little meeting room for a community group. If you needed to use that, we've used that before for some different meetings. At Fenwick Park, there was a new roof put on, new concrete around the shelter, the painting of the exterior and then interior. That has always been sort of the preferred park for graduation parties and things like that. So really turned out nice. The Worth building, what used to be, I think some of you would remember it as the teen center, which was connected to the pool area. That room has actually been upgraded also, and we can use that for some, actually the Norwood Boosters could rent that for a pregame party, or there's all sorts of different uses. There are a lot of, that can be used through the winter now for, I don't know, birthday parties, graduation parties, things like that. So that's also going to be a rentable room. Hunter Park, there's a ton of work going on at the Hunter Park, the new playground area. Excavations working, or they put in seed and straw in the last few days. The concrete walking is working in place, the fencing, things like that, and then working on some stuff for the dog park that's going in there for the accessories that'll go around it. Northwoods Park, over on the other side, new roof and the siding work's been completed. The painting has started. There was a wall removed to increase access to the building a little bit. A baseball field is being resurfaced. And I talked last time, I think, about all the baseball field work that's being done and how Clint Zimmerman, our superintendent of public works, has been working to get funds in place, privately donated funds. So then the recreation center, the new fitness center, Hacks Fitness Room, that has the new rubber flooring in it. There's been equipment moved in there that was, there was a bunch of equipment that was donated, fitness equipment that was donated to the fire department, to the firefighters, and we picked up some of their equipment, which is really nice equipment. So we've got some great equipment down there. New basketball goals and the wall pads, all that stuff is coming in, and then team benches. So there's a ton of work going on there, and even the indoor pool, they're repairing the tile now. The pump has been rebuilt. Actually, so we're in really good shape on projects going through that stuff. So those are about the only things I had. We're working human resources wide. I know you talked about law and ordinance and human resources, and we are working. We've got our human resources director, who's sort of our executive assistant to the mayor, who is working on a lot of improvements to our human resources and how we're keeping them. And then we're looking at some software systems and different things to really take us up a step on that one. So those are all on track. And then water meter readers, or water meter systems, we've got the quotes back in for that. So we should see some requests for ordinances to move forward with getting our water meter stuff repaired. And then we continue to make progress with the Elm Avenue stuff, trying to move that forward. So we're making progress. Just seems like it's towards the end of the year, but we're getting there.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Naru, you had your hand up?
It was for unfinished business. I realized afterwards that people wanted to ask him questions, so my bad. I'll wait till section end.
Okay. Mr. Tracy, who had their hand up first?
Go ahead, Mr. Thompson first.
Go ahead.
Thanks, Mr. Tracy. I just wanted to ask about street plan. I know that we had the audit done by, I can't remember the name of the company that did it, and I assume that's what's sort of directing the maintenance that you're talking about. One of my hopes when we had that audit done was that we would eventually be able to put together like a long-term plan that would be like this year where we're working on these streets. This year we're repaving this streets. Next year we'll be repaving these streets and on, so that we could get like, and I'm talking like a 10, 15-year plan, even if that's changes. You know, I think people, well, I mean, I would like to know, and I would even like to be a part of helping to put together, like, look at the audit, look at the money, start looking at the data and seeing which streets need to happen first. And I mean, and the reality is we need to eventually develop a plan that is cyclical, so that in 30 years when you finish paving all the streets, you start over again. I think that would be the end goal, is to figure out what that plan is. But I haven't even seen the audit, so I would like to see that at some point, if possible.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Mr. Tracy.
Through the mayor to the chair, now I regret letting you go first, because that was on the top of my list right there. Seeing as we haven't had a streets committee meeting in a year, the mayor mentioned that us, council, have approved so much money and put so much money towards the streets. However, we haven't had a streets committee meeting in a year, and we haven't gone over I know myself, Mr. Kelch, have requested a streets committee meeting to go over the audit, to review the audit, to try and put together a plan like Mr. Thompson had requested previously, to try and put together a 10 or 15-year plan. However, again, I'm going to mention it one more time, we have not had a streets committee meeting in a year. And the last time that we did it was to provide plans on slowing traffic down, which still has not been implemented or even discussed outside the streets committee. Second, it was something referenced the vaccination that you had mentioned, but I still stand by what I had said, that this is like the flu. You can get the vaccine, and the whole reason that it doesn't protect against Delta, even though nobody knows what we're getting at this point, is because it's like the flu. It changes. You have to change the formula every year. We're 1 year behind on the flu every single year because they don't know what strand of flu it is until somebody gets it and comes into the hospital with it. So getting vaccinated, again, is not 100%, it's not even 95% cure, 95% protection. I can tell you, at a hospital, not the one I work with, at a completely different hospital, 60% of those patients that are in that hospital right now have had both vaccinations or have had Johnson & Johnson. 60%. So that information never comes out. And again, it's because you want to channel the information that you want out. And that's how everything's working. Everybody's getting misinformation, and nobody from the inside wants to come out and say anything about it. So I appreciate that you're encouraging it. However, again, the best recourse is to get it, just like the kids. Right now, I should have mentioned this in my earlier statement, but I'll mention it during yours. The children's hospitals around the country are not seeing kids come in with COVID. They're seeing kids come in with things, with viruses that they get during the winter. Here's why. Because you're masking children up. Because you're masking them up. You guys can shake your head all you want. I'm working in that environment. I work in that environment. So obviously, you can trust doctors and other people, but you can't trust me, even though I work in the healthcare environment. So that's fine. You don't have to. You showed support for several. Also, Mayor, you showed support for several ordinances that are on the agenda tonight. However, publicly, you have not shown support for the chronic nuisance ordinance that we sat here and tirelessly fought over for months and months. And now we're at 6 months so far of having it voted on, but not implemented yet for the city of Norwood. So, I've offered to take PTO on days to come out and assist with any implementation, even though I don't make enough money to do that. But I've offered to do that. Another council member has offered to do the same to help implement it. I'd like to see a little more oomph put towards this chronic nuisance ordinance so that we can get it going and use that toolbox or use that tool in our tool belt. The last thing I've got, Mr. Mayor, is I was told about 2.5, 3 months ago that there was a fix to Homer Avenue as far as the water issue and flooding out the driveways, causing severe damage to them. But the money has not been released for that project to start, and I'm trying to figure out where that money is and why it hasn't been released for that project to start. I wanted to wait until everything was solved with Elm Avenue before I brought that to anybody's attention. But, I think the residents at Homer Avenue, for them to sit there and try and fix their driveways every 3-4 months is absolutely ridiculous, when there's a fix right there that should only take a couple days.
Is that a question?
Anything else?
Was there a question?
If you want to comment, you can comment. Otherwise, that was just.
Well, on the Homer Avenue, I would say, I'm not aware of who told you that. I don't remember ever bringing that up in one of my conversations as an administrative report. I don't remember ever telling anyone there's a fix to Homer Avenue. So as you bring that up, I'm mystified because it wasn't something that I said to you or to council members. So when you say that, I'm at a loss of really being able to defend myself, because it's the first I heard of your situation where you feel that Homer Avenue was something that I said at some point, which totally have no recollection whatsoever of ever telling you or any council member or anybody that there is a fix for Homer Avenue. None, zero. On my ability as the mayor to support people getting vaccinated, that's the mayor's prerogative. So you can talk until you're blue in the face, but quite frankly, that's what I can do, and that's what I would do. If there's an issue, I can talk about it, and that's it. So, but thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Any other questions, comments for the mayor? Mr. Garrett?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, wanted to see if, there's been talks, and I don't know if we've put them in yet, about putting the parking meters at the municipal lot, like at Sherman and Station and Elman Station. Have we done that yet?
We're still working on our parking meter plan. Ultimately, there were parking meters that we received from the Xavier Station area that we can implement, but then there's also the Easy Park app that we started going down that route, which is, it's on your phone and it's like Cincinnati uses. It's basically the same operation that Cincinnati uses. There are 2 electronic vehicle charging stations that are getting ready to be put in that lot, the lot on the corner there. So it's a work in progress. Yes, there's absolutely been a lot of discussion about it within the administration.
If just to follow up, my request would be if we could hold off on making those pay lots until next summer. This will be the final year, I believe, that Williams Avenue, it's their turn to go to middle school. And with those additional teachers, they use those lots. And then, so just to be, they've not had to pay, meters so far. So if we could hold off on putting meters in there until next summer, that way Williams will be back to their school, and I don't think the other 2 have already been taken care of because they've already spent their time. So that way we could kind of work with them on that. Another question.
Yes, sir.
I'd like to ask for a third time, if we could get a report from the building department on what's coming in the city, what's going on in the city, who's pulling permits, and what they're for. Not residential, just the commercial stuff that, and business stuff that's going on in our city. And then another report that I think that, we would like to see is a report on the 311, or whatever that's called now, that we lost our dispatch, that I was against, but we wanted to use that for the 311. So could we get a report on what's going on with that, how many calls they take, all that kind of stuff? Because I personally don't think that it's being effective. And so if we could get a report on a status of that, that'd be great as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gabbard. Mr. Tracy.
Mr. Gabbard just reminded me of something, through the chair to the mayor. If we could also get a report of how much we're spending each month on Hamilton County communications, because I think it'd be beneficial for council to know how many calls go into the county and how much we've spent out of that each month.
Thank you, Mr. Tracy. Anyone else have any questions, comments for the mayor? Mr. Bonds?
Thank you, Mr. President. So I just want to be kind of clear. So the thing that we approved with Hamilton County, it was a fixed amount this year. So it was set in the ordinance, the exact amount that we would pay this year. And then next year they will base how much we're being charged based on how many runs we have this year. So I mean, it is good still to see the runs, don't get me wrong, but the cost should be fixed, a set amount each month until the end of the year. At least that was the contract. I mean, that I remember approving personally. So.
Thank you, Mr. Bonds. Anyone else? Mr. Tracy?
Through the chair to Mr. Bonzo, please. I understand that it's fixed, but we don't know that that's what's actually occurring. We don't know that that's an actual fixed amount each month. That's where I'm trying to come from, is we don't know without reports if we're over budget for a month, and then also if it comes back showing that we might be over that monthly total and the county is eating the costs, we can say that next year this is where we're going to be at cost-wise. So, there's plenty of fixed areas that we end up going over budget for that we're going to have to say, oh, we need to increase this amount, we need to increase this amount. How many times have we come into a meeting where we've had to increase a key to make sure that it's not underfunded? That's the whole point, is I want to see how many calls have gone into the county each month. And we should be able to see that. I shouldn't have to call to the county and get that information every single month myself. That comes to the mayor, and that should be released under administrative reports as transparency. That's the only reason I ask, is for transparency, since we did get rid of our 911, which again I was against.
Thank you, Mr. Tracy. Anyone else have any questions for the mayor? Mr. Bonzo?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. So I will say that anytime I have had questions about, spending in specific keys or specific counts, I'll just say that the auditor has always been very helpful to me, so you might want to reach out to him. And then also we get these monthly reports from the auditor's office that we're about to approve a letter confirming that we did get them. And even though those reports are not the most easiest thing to read, and I'll give anybody that, it does take a little time to kind of get educated on how to see it. There's a lot of things in there like that if you look at the July report and then compare it to the June report and see like how much is coming for dispatch, then it kind of is a way to help see it. So questions are valid. I'm always interested to see call volumes. I think it's not a bad thing to see. So, but this year the cost should be fixed. At least that's the contract that was approved.
There's your key word there. We've said it twice now. Should be.
Any other questions or comments for Mayor Schoen? We'll move on to unfinished business. Mr. Norwood.
Yes, please. Bringing this up in unfinished business to follow on from the nuisance ordinance that we passed a couple months ago. The reason that's pertinent here, in response to the house that we heard to earlier, is we have a very big problem. And I know that Norwood is not immune. We're not wholly alone to the opioid epidemic. But this house is particularly important and differentiated in two ways. Not the least of which is when you talked about the civil liberties that we want to make sure that Norwood doesn't infringe upon. There are levels and lines that when you cross them and and you cross them and you cross them and you cross them, at some point we have to acknowledge that you're giving up some of those liberties. And in this case, I'm going to explain why I think that they have long gone crossed that line, probably about 5 years ago. So why this house instead of other houses in Norwood? The first is its proximity to the Williams Avenue School. I'm sure that there are varsity ball players who can throw a baseball from this house to the front door of an elementary school. That's very active. We see, students going up and down there all the time. The second is we have an active and involved neighborhood around that, such that those 10 houses that she was talking about, that Mrs. Sickinger was talking about, they've formed a really strong partnership with the city. And that partnership actually should be applauded. You, Mr. Mayor, for the commitment to the poll cameras, the commitment to the police presence increase, your police chief's incredibly timely response every time that we call, and there has been a number of calls, which we'll get to in a second. So the city is working on it, you're right, and I'm grateful for it, and there's no sarcasm there. I think that this is a demonstration of our police and our mayor really, really caring about responding to citizens when they're calling. There is another step that has to be taken because for 5 years, that hasn't been enough. It's not for lack of effort. We just need to be thinking about doing something a little bit differently. So we talked about how there's more runs than we can imagine. She spouted off some of those statistics. It's worth noting that 5 years ago, the drug dealers at least hid their drugs in McDonald's bags. I know because I kind of live pretty close to there. They no longer do that. And these photos, all of these are in a week. This is not over the course of months. This is a weekend. And they're not even doing it in their McDonald's bags. They're watching you film them, the neighbors film them, and they don't even care. It's almost the audacity that's kind of bothering me and should bother Norwood, that the criminals do not even care that you're watching them. And they cuss, they throw rocks, their guns are out. We call, they get arrested, but they're back. And actually, in that case, the strung out dude who's hanging over here, that 2 p.m. on a Saturday when the kids are playing in the Williams Avenue Garden, he was back in the house 40 minutes later. 40 minutes later, okay? So this is 5 years of that behavior going on. At this point, I really don't care where they go. I just care that they leave Norwood, okay? I'm not trying to solve the problem anymore or think about, well, what if they go? Yeah, I don't care. And I think we need to be thinking about the tools that make sure that they actually leave. So, what are the 2 actions I'm looking for and why is this an unfinished business? The first is I would like us to continue as the administration to enforce with extreme and the full extent of the law, pushing on the lead abatement, the child abuse calls, the animal cruelty, the fact that the house is falling apart, that we send tickets and fines to all the other houses, when their paint needs chipped or the paint is chipped. We need to be so aggressive and so obnoxious that it's not worth it for the drug dealers to be there. I know that we can't kick them out forever and put them in jail because, they're kicking dogs and but we don't, because they're kicking dogs and throwing rocks and, their house is falling apart. But we can make this very problematic for them to be there. The second is a tool that Mr. Jason was referring to, that nuisance ordinance. And I know it probably has a lot of holes. We heard the assistant law director say as such. But we also know that there are other cities in our state of Ohio that use this with varying degrees of success. What does success look like, and what should we be looking for? I'm not expecting us to be able to, with this nuisance ordinance, to be able to lock Nick up and throw away the key for 30 years. I don't think that's going to happen because of the nuisance ordinance. What I think is actually going to happen is the more practical outcome of us stacking fines, continuing to have evidence to make this so annoying and so impractical for drug dealers to make money. These landlords, they're not making money on strung out tenants. The $300 a month that they're getting, or probably not getting, is not the reason they're staying in business. It's because there's some involvement on their part to benefit from these drugs. So if we just make this very, very annoying, they'll go somewhere else. And at this point, I'm not trying to solve the problem. I'm trying to get them out of our city. I don't even care anymore if they go 2 miles that way, okay? So that's my ask, is for the committee to go again with the nuisance ordinance, and I would ask the law department to be extremely involved and as creative as possible to try to plug some of those holes, to be like other cities in Ohio and try to achieve the outcome, which is make this ridiculously hard and impractical to continue to deal at 2 p.m. on Saturday with kids and video cameras around. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Darno. Mr. Tracy?
Since it's under unfinished business, I'm going to comment on the chronic nuisance ordinance real quick. This chronic nuisance ordinance was brought to us by our assistant law director, who stated that he loved this ordinance so much and that he would absolutely go with this ordinance. The only thing that I did was make it fit, along with Mr. Couch, make it fit for the city of Norwood. This was an ordinance that he brought to me that all I did was copy, paste it, and absolutely turn it to fit Norwood and the city. So to sit here after 9 months of work on that, 8 months of work on that, and be told by the assistant law director who brought this original ordinance to us from another city to say that there are so many holes in this that he cannot enforce it is absolutely ridiculous to me. Absolutely ridiculous. And to me, I think it's because I am not liked by himself. I'm going to come out and say it. He may not like me, and that's probably the reason this ordinance is failing. And it's terrible that a personal vendetta is being placed on the residents of Norwood because of me. So I am going to call a housing committee meeting next Monday at 7 p.m. And we're going to sit and we're going to try to hash this out as much as we can. I am going to recommend 2 additional amendments to the ordinance to add in additional violations. And I would like to request Keith to show up at that meeting, please, so that we can go through this ordinance, because I don't believe that we are doing our job. I have said it ever since I took office. We just need to do our job. And it's a shame that we have this ordinance that we can utilize in our tool belt, and we have people that refuse or disregard to utilize it and implement it in the way that it should be implemented. Mr. Gabbard had sat there and laid out a plan for a task force team, and this has absolutely been a collaboration for the ages on something like this. So next Monday at 7 p.m., I'd like to call a housing committee meeting to go over this chronic nuisance ordinance to figure out why we cannot enforce it.
Thank you, Mr. Tracy. Mr. Gabbard?
Yeah, I'd like to follow up on that. I've been trying to get this task force together for a lot of years. This is a prime example. Whether we even use the nuisance ordinance on this, if we would just have the administration send a representative from each of our departments to stand in front of that house, I'm sure that each one of those departments could list 10 things about that house that they could start hammering on and then get it taken care of. But for some reason, we can't coordinate schedules, or I'm not sure what the problem is, but we can't get a member of each of those departments to stand in front of a house like this and do what we need to do, and that's get it shut down. Now, we could use the nuisance ordinance as a tool to supplement that task force, but that task force alone could shut this thing down. And so, Mayor, we're imploring you to put the task force together and make them get out there and do this and shut this place down. Please.
Thank you, Mr. Gabbard.
Can I comment?
Yeah.
Would you like to comment? Go ahead.
There are orders, and the building department's been involved, the health department's been involved, the police department's been involved, the fire department has been involved. They're all aware of this building. They're doing what is necessary. to move the process along with what tools they have. Even the nuisance ordinance, from my understanding, is the house has not met the criteria to be cited by the police department. That's what my understanding is. Now, we can have a discussion about that at 7 p.m. next Monday, and I'll ask for the chief to be there, and we can talk about that exact part of it. Because my understanding is, and I asked the chief, why can't we cite, why are we not citing for that? And there was a discussion of what runs have been there and what really meets the criteria in the nuisance ordinance and what doesn't. And my understanding is that it doesn't meet that. But that needs to come out at the right time from the right people, which is the chief, and he can talk to council members who put that together, and maybe there's a discussion on whether that's the sort of the teeth in the ordinance that need to be there, that maybe Mr. Gary has a question about also, but we'll work with, we can sit down on that Monday evening and discuss that and make sure that it's right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Center. Any other old business? Mr. Bonsall?
Just to follow up on that, just for the committee meeting, I mean, if you could please have them, so like a printout from the health department of every order that's currently active, or maybe even ones that are not active in the past couple of years, every police run, if there could be a list of it, I mean, everything that has anything to do with that ordinance, if we could just have a list ready to go so that, if it's not meeting it, we can talk about it right there at the meeting, that nobody has to go back. And I'm sure that they probably would have already done that, but if we can make sure it's done, I think that would go a long way.
Thank you, Mr. Bonsall. Mr. Kelch?
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to thank Mr. Race for calling this meeting. Thank Mr. Dorn for bringing this issue up. This is something that's very bothersome to me. Like Mr. Tracy alluded to, we spent a lot of time putting this together, and then having a kind of already more put together ordinance brought to us by Mr. Gary. And, in all of our meetings, we talked about, this is the teeth our city needs to have civil penalties against property owners for a lot of these issues. So you can imagine the shock and surprise that I had when our assistant law director, Mr. Gary, says, well, this ordinance is not enforceable, when they're the ones, their fingerprints are on it just as much as ours. So either, it's my opinion, either they purposely misled us, which would bring up some questions, or they just don't understand what's enforceable or not, which would bring up some questions. I'm glad that we're going to be able to meet, and that's where I'm going to leave all the stone throwing and the finger pointing, because what we're going to do Monday, I think, is the right thing to move forward on this. And I do feel like this is something that we could have already and should have already had happen with this ordinance. There's no mystery, we're working on it. There's open invitations to the administration, to the law department, to other departments to come be a part of it. So, like I said, that's where I'm going to end the finger pointing and the mudslinging or whatever. I'm glad that we can have this meeting and we can actually get to the bottom of this and talk about it, because there's something that needs done, and it needs done bad.
Thank you, Mr. Kelch. Mr. Braden?
Thank you, Mr. President. So I've got several comments. We're not going to end the mudslinging. That's not going to end, okay? What comes to mind is never let a good, and let's get the drug dealers out of Norwood, okay? Let's get them out of Norwood. But I got 2 of them out of Ward 4 without the nuisance ordinance, okay? The health department can do what they have to do. Mr. Snyder done stated that they're in compliance. So what else can we do? So it's not going to stop. You don't like somebody, you're going to bash them. That's what this council does. So I got rid of 2 of them without that ordinance. So keep working on it, Mr. Leonardo. We'll get rid of it. We don't need that ordinance. We'll get rid of them. The health department will do it. Okay? We've done it before without that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Braden. Any other old business, unfinished business to be brought forward? Mr. Thompson?
Yeah, thank you. Just want to take a quick minute to acknowledge Mr. Davis, who's still sitting in the back of the room there. He probably doesn't remember, but I used to live across the street from him when he was like 6 years old, so it's really cool to see what you've done. When it comes to the mural on the building there, I think the design is really nice. I think it's very well done. We have an ordinance here for murals. Some of us voted to have murals in that area, but the council as a whole voted to not have murals in that area. Now, that's less of an issue because this is a city building, and the city can make an exception for that, but I really believe that falls to the administration to make that call and not to council, because it is city property. We could all, I suppose, voice our support, yea or nay, but it's because of that ordinance and the fact that it's city property, it's kind of in limbo.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Any other unfinished business? We'll move on to new business. I would like to have a committee of the whole meeting next Tuesday, August 31st, in council chambers. If everyone can make 7:30, we'll go ahead and send out the notice.
That was 8:31.
8:31,
At what time again?
7:30.
Thank you.
Any other new business? Mr. Gabbard?
I'd like to remind everyone that Norwood City Schools start back tomorrow, so please, as you're driving around town, especially school zones, just keep that in your back of your mind that school's back in session as of tomorrow. I want to wish all the students and teachers and faculty and such just an outstanding year, and let's have a good, safe year this year. But keep that in the back of your mind as you get up and take off to work or head back from home or driving around the city, that kids will be out on the streets again in force. So just be on the lookout for them.
Thank you, Mr. Gabbard. Any other new business? Did you have a follow-up?
I have a second one.
Oh, go ahead, sir.
I want to apologize. At the last council meeting, we had a vote on a liquor license, and I want to apologize for not doing due diligence on that, and I totally dropped the ball, and I take ownership on that. We didn't ask questions. I made mention of it in a committee meeting, but I still don't know that if anybody knows where that liquor license is actually to. I know that some residents went into CVS and they said it wasn't CVS, they think it was the place downstairs. We should have known that for sure, exactly who that was going to. We didn't ask it, I didn't ask, I'm going to take it, I didn't ask questions to find out exactly, so I want to publicly apologize for that. With that said, in the past, years ago, the clerk, whenever we would get one of those requests for renewal or if we want to have a hearing or anything, they would get actual communication of an opinion from all the departments, health department, fire department, police department, and it would be stapled to that so we could then see if anybody's got a problem with that from the other departments. So if we could possibly make that, if I could request that in the future, anytime those come, if we could request an opinion from each of the departments to get their opinion on yay or nay on whether we should pass those, I would appreciate that. And she's got a response.
Mrs. Williams?
Based upon communication regarding those liquor license mails, this was way back, like, when I first started this job, but there was a discussion of requesting those from each of the departments, and I know that that is our process in my department. And she does it, or Liz, my assistant, does not send it on to council until everybody's responded, saying that they have no issue with it. So if it comes to us and is on, in communications, she's already heard from everybody that there's no issue. Now, we can attach those emails if you want, but we're already checking that. So if there was an issue, she would let council know.
All right, that's a great piece of information. As long as we know that once it comes here, then everybody's, give it a thumbs up and they don't have problems with it, and then it's on us. But a question through just to get the law.
Mr. Moore?
Yeah, I just want to confirm that those emails do go out, and but when you have somebody who's new like this, there's no record. I mean, the health department doesn't have any problem with it, the police department doesn't, they run the background checks on the primary owners, but they have no record in Norwood, there's no history of anything, and so it's unlikely anything's going to come back for particularly for a new one.
Right.
Like that, so.
Thank you,
They do
Mr.
send
Moore.
them out, I just wanted to confirm that, because I get them.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Moore.
Thank you.
Mr. Bonds?
Thank you. So, just back to the mural thing, just want to confirm, Mr. Mayor, can you talk about your position on this? And, are you looking for something from council to make this happen? Are you completely against it? Are you completely for it? I mean, just where's your head on this?
Mayor Schneider?
The mural, the explanation, the Eagle Scout project, all those things I look at and say, well, that's, he weaved a interesting story. My concern as the mayor is that this city council said not in residential areas. And there was quite a bit of discussion, not in residential areas. This is a residential area. We have a member of the community right up the street who started putting a mural on the side of his building that we made stop doing it. And not really what I would consider to be much of a residential area, because the post office is there and his office is close to a parking lot and all. So we told a community member, no, you cannot do that in this area, and now we're going to put it in, the city is going to condone, hey, let's throw this in a residential area. Oh, it's our building, we're above so that's the reason why I would say no. Quite frankly, if there were other murals along Montgomery Road where we thought they would all of a sudden spring up, we thought there'd be, mural applications and all this stuff going on this year, we didn't see it. If there were other murals within the community and this was not a subject that was discussed in the past, 9 months, I'd say, maybe we've got a little leeway. But right now, I think the timing is absolutely wrong, and it would be wrong for me as the mayor to say, yeah, I approve doing this in a residential area. Although council doesn't agree putting them in residential area, and they made that decision based on community members' input, then, so that's where I stand with it right now. Right now, I would say no, it's not the proper time for this mural to go in a residential area.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Any other new business? Mr. Brady.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I've been informed of an issue at Hunter Park, and I'm not exactly sure how to go about it, but we supposedly have a guy moved in, maybe a homeless, and I want to be compassionate about, people's issues. If somebody's homeless, I want to be compassionate about that, and I realize that they have issues. So I don't want to be inconsiderate, but I'm told that we have the guy that moved in Hunter Park, that we have some renovations going on, and if maybe, do we send a letter to the police chief? Do I talk to him and see if he can investigate? I don't know what route to take, but if we could, look into something, to be done about that. Supposedly, we got a homeless guy living in Hunter Park, so. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Brady. Any other new business?
Call the police chief. Call the police department.
Then we'll move on to communications. We have one communication this evening. P1, Auditor Jim Stiff, is the July monthly financial report. Mr. Tracy.
I'd like to make a motion to file this as read.
Motion by Mr. Geraci to receive and file as if read. May I have a second? Mr. Kelch.
Second.
Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bunzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye. The motion passes. All members are present, so we'll move on to adjournment. May I have a motion for adjournment? Mr. Bunzel.
I move we adjourn.
Motion by Mr. Bunzel, second by Mr. Thompson. Please call the roll.
Mr. Bunzel?
Yes.
Oh, sorry. I didn't hear you.
Yes.
And Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
All members present voting aye. The motion passes. We're adjourned.